Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's Cabinet meeting of today, the 18th of July 2024. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and Chair of the meeting as the leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources. As usual, we'll be using the Council's hybrid platform, and so the usual reminders that the meeting's being live streamed and recorded and then will be uploaded to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's website as soon as practicable after the meeting. Also, participants should ensure their microphones are either on mute or not activated when not speaking, and anyone who wishes to speak should either activate their request to speak function or, if in the chamber, just raise their hands. Finally, the chat function is used solely to highlight any technical issues or to get the attention of the democratic service officers. So that's the housekeeping for today. We can move on to the agenda. And agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. I have 3 apologies this afternoon. That's Councillor Wilson, Councillor Birch and Councillor Perks. But I can see that the rest of us are either in the chamber or online, so that's good. Then agenda item 2, to receive declarations of interest and the nature of such interests, if there are any. I haven't had any notified.
No declarations of interest for this meeting. Thank you, Leah.
Super, thanks. I was just looking to see who was talking. And I haven't missed out. We don't actually have any minutes to approve on this meeting because the meeting was only last week. So that's fine. We can go straight on to agenda item 3, which is the first of 2 references we've got. And it's a reference from Democratic Services Committee on the 1st of July 2024 in relation to workshops that they held, the tools of effective scrutiny, and that was a workshop for members. And this was only, so when you look at some of the figures in there, this was only for scrutiny members, not everyone. There was quite a lot of feedback in relation to this this workshop, and there was a post-session survey, and that's included in Appendix A to the report, and some interesting comments there in relation to how useful it was. In fact, it was very useful. How much difference it had made to the capability of members in terms of scrutinising the work of the council. And I have to say, for me, scrutiny is probably one of the most important functions within the council, so it's essential that it's working well. And as I said, there was feedback. There was discussion as to whether or not the workshop should be included as a mandatory session within the 2027 elected member induction programme. And I think from the feedback, that would seem a very sensible thing to do. I know that I think there was some dissent. I'm just looking at that because there was discussion as well as to how full on and onerous the training sessions were, but overall it was felt that should go ahead. One thing I would raise is, I said, looking at the feedback, being so positive, but it appears that not all members to whom it was relevant had the opportunity to attend. And I think it's worth informally, if the democratic officers could check with the scrutiny committee chairs and vice chairs whether or not the workshop should be run again before 2027 to allow those members that weren't able to participate to benefit from the content. And so all that's basically been brought or sent to us for today is that there's a recommendation to Cabinet that the tools of effective scrutiny workshop be included as a mandatory session within the 2027 elected member induction programme. And I'm very happy to move that.
And I'll second that recommendation.
Super. I think it's also worth, when we talk later, we've got reports later, that maybe something around how scrutiny works and getting the best out of scrutiny would actually be of interest to residents, but I think we'll do that through other channels. So I can't see any dissent on that, so that recommendation is passed. And then we go on to agenda item 4. This is a reference from the Extraordinary Democratic Services Committee on the 16th of July, and this is the hybrid meeting platform update. And this is something that if you look at the main report, if I just go back to it, there's a long history of discussing the best ways of achieving participation both of elected members and also of members of the public, and those discussions started back in July of last year. There was first a proposal that scrutiny committees should be online unless it was something that was significant from a county-wide perspective. That was felt not to be appropriate, so it was agreed that there'd be a trial period for scrutiny meetings to be held on a hybrid basis and broadcast live while we assess that. The outcomes of that are actually in the appendices, and it appears that the vast majority of scrutiny members have actually preferred to attend remotely, and also that it doesn't appear to have been detrimental to people's ability to participate. But I think what I need to clarify is that while this will be is proposed to be the way forward for evening meetings, if there is felt to be an agenda item of importance on within a scrutiny agenda, then discussion between the chair and the chief exec can determine whether or not that should be undertaken on a hybrid basis and broadcast live. So, we've got agenda items on here tonight, which are to do with the budget, which is probably one of the most important things that we do as a council. It might be that those are decided that they should be held in a hybrid format, but I think looking at our zero carbon aims and also resources that we're working with, that would seem a sensible way forward. So there was dissent to this. That was Councillor Carroll wasn't able to support it, and both Councillor Carroll and the chair also expressed their disappointment. But overall, the recommendation from them was passed. The other thing that is worth checking is the actual format of the meetings. I think it's fair to say we're still in a stage of development, talking to other councils, the complexity of having English language translation, both remotely and in person, of live streaming, and of managing the meeting in both ways. It can be tricky, both functionally, but also I think, as we saw with the feedback on the previous report, because sometimes can be confusing for members. And as we're working through that, we did have a proposal when we first looked at the hybrid solution, that we would look at trying it for a year and then signing for a 3-year contract with a potential 1-year extension. We actually felt on discussion with the company that it's probably better while we're still in a stage of development that if that contract is managed on a 1+1+1 year basis, so that we can continue to work together and find the best solutions to any last glitches that we are still experiencing. So I think I've covered all the areas that they discussed. So the recommendations that have come to us today is that Democratic Services Committee recommended to Cabinet that it continues the contract with VPAV Limited on a 1+1+1 year basis in order that future remote and hybrid council meetings can be held on the EasyConf software platform. I'm happy to agree that delegated authority be granted to the Director of Corporate Resources and the Monitoring Officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, in consultation with the Leader of the Council and Chief Executive, to continue the contract with VPAV Limited on a 1+1+1 year basis from 21st of August 2024. Third, that all scrutiny committee meetings be held on a remote basis only, unless a matter of county-wide interest had been determined by the chair of the scrutiny committee in conjunction with the chief exec and council's current multi-location meetings policy in the constitution be amended accordingly, and I would be happy to agree that, and that the multi-location meetings policy be amended to read that the Shared Regulatory Services SRS Joint Committee annual committee meeting can be held on a hybrid and or in-person basis, subject to the chair of committee's agreement. So I'm happy to agree the recommendations or resolutions of the Democratic Services Committee.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. And all is quiet in for everybody else. So moving on to agenda item 5, this is the closure of accounts for 23-24. And I think, as we see from this agenda today, even though we've only just agreed a budget, this is where it all starts again. In fact, it all started before this, as these reports were being developed. So our finance teams have been working on that probably since about May, I would say. The first report is to do with the closure of accounts. So it's where we ended up at the end of last year's budget, the ones that finished at the beginning of April 2024. And the year-end position was actually, and this is terminology again, it was a break-even position after net transfers from reserves of £34 million. So we did actually take money out of reserves last year. Those transfers were made up of 417,000 transferred from the council fund, 13 million from the housing revenue account, 12 million transferred into specific reserves from revenue, and 12 million transferred from specific reserves to provide one-off funding for projects and overspends, and 9 million drawdown from reserves to fund the capital programme and for displacement required by capital grants. The council fund now stands at 11 million as of 31st of March of this year. The council encountered, I think it's fair to say, significant revenue pressures during 23-24. Particular pressures were in respect of inflationary pressures regarding contracts and pay pressures, which reflects the cost of living market pressures and the council's commitment to paying a real living wage. In services, council also continued to experience significant demand pressures for supporting children and adult social services, people experiencing homelessness, and pupils with additional learning needs. And those were the very areas that we had prioritised in terms of supporting our more vulnerable residents. Pressures were also experienced due to delays and constraints associated with delivery of savings targets. We talk a lot about schools, don't we, in schools' budgets, because at the end of the day, it's about half of our budget as a whole. And schools outturned with a slightly more favourable position than had been reported during the year. And that was partly due to additional grant income from Welsh Government. The majority of schools made progress towards a balanced budget in year. And as of 31st of March, there were 22 schools in a deficit position, which was just over 41% in total. And schools ended with a remaining net reserve balance of 2.3, or just slightly over 2.3 million. But the sum masks some significant variation. So while schools overall have a surplus of or a reserve of 2.3 million, the variances across individual schools mean that some schools have significant deficits and some have significant balances. Challenging savings and efficiency targets have been set for 2023-24. And the progress against these saving targets is good. And I think we have to give our thanks to our officers who have been relentless in chasing down those savings this year. And while services have mitigated some savings in year, these savings will be kept under review in 2024-25 as services move to identify these on a more sustainable basis over the medium term. But we'll discuss that a bit more as we come on to our future planning. After taking account of directorate movements to and from reserves, the revenue outturn showed a surplus of just over 2 million. And it's proposed that we transfer to reserves, transfer this to reserves to be utilised as follows. 2 million, so the bulk of it, will be put into a new reserve. I would imagine this is going to be a temporary reserve due to what it's going to be used for. And that will be used to offset education deficits in 2024 to 25 on a provisional basis, whilst the council works with schools on establishing a coordinated approach to tackling school deficits. So our finance and our education teams are already working with schools to find ways of minimising their deficits, but if they are not recoverable, then there will be the reserve set aside in order to support them. And then there was the additional £80,000 surplus, and that's been transferred to the general fund for future use. The housing revenue account had a slighter than projected drawdown on the ring fence reserve, and that was 3.525 million. This level of reserve is thought to be reasonable in the context of the pressures in the service area in 24-25, and will be reviewed as part of the preparation for the next business plan. The level of usable reserves reduced in year, although by less than had been projected. But some of these commitments have been slipped into 2024-25 in accordance with capital expenditure slippage. The council undertook a further reserve allocation exercise in year as outlined in the 2024-25 budget proposals. And this is also reflected in the outturn position. So that's where we are at the moment. And we just have 3 recommendations before us on this report. Firstly, that the report and the financial measures taken and proposed be approved. Secondly, that the allocation of overall council surplus as set out below be approved. And that's 2 million transferred to new reserve to offset school deficits on a provisional basis in 2024-25. And £80,000 to council fund to offset general pressures. And 3, that the report is referred to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee for consideration. And I'd move.
I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. That's right. Just
Thanks,
switch that
Chair.
off. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, being Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health, you can see within this report there's considerable overspend and, you know, you plan your budget over at the beginning of the year and you just look at some of the challenges we've had. There is an increased demand, but, you know, we're against also the providers, they're struggling as well. We've had to utilise some reserves, and I know in previous years there's been a view that the reserves should have been utilised, but if we hadn't had them this year, then we would have gone over quite considerable. But needless to say, when you look at the overall reserves for the council, it's taken quite a hit, and it's not, you know, this is the first of 3 years I see that if we continue as we're doing this year, then by year 2, 3, we won't have any reserves left. So it's important to recognise the demands are there. You know, both on adults and young children, just to see that we're trying to deal with it. And you know, often councillors talk about it. We're in a gloom situation, but we can't stress that enough. And thankfully, we managed the budget this year, but the horizon doesn't look too good at the moment. So look forward to the scrutiny, seeing what solutions we can come up with. Thank you.
Thanks, Eddie. I think it's very relevant, and only this week I was talking to colleagues elsewhere in Wales where discussing the steps we've taken to help take people out of hospital as soon as we possibly could, and we'd actually managed to get it down to a very short time, but that actually cost us millions of pounds to do in terms of additional care packages. I think it was the right choice to make. I think it was the right thing to do because those people did not want to be in hospital, they wanted to be at home. But we have to recognise the impact on our budget as well, and you know, we have communicated that clearly to others, but it's something that a lot of people are facing. So, you know, we will have to discuss this at length as we go forward in terms of budgets. But that's super, thanks. And don't hear any comments from anyone else, so that's agreed. Agenda item 6 is the capital closure of accounts. Actually, this is a really good picture, I think. In the report outlines the outturn of the 2023-24 capital programme by directorate and details the funding sources. Right back at the start of the year, there were extra schemes totalling nearly 2.4 million were added late into the programmes, and that meant that the adjusted programme was 103.829 million to be exact, and the actual capital expenditure during the year was 88.62 million. So despite capital schemes facing continued challenges due to a number of years, and that's, you know, whether that be cost increases or shortage of resources or time delays, it actually is really good to note that the capital programme actually turned out at 88.62 million, and that's an achievement of over 85% delivery against the capital programme. And I think that, again, it's due to the commitment and hard work across all directorates that the net slippage was only 15 million for the whole programme, and that required approval by emergency powers into 2024-25 programme, so that will be delivered there. The summary position of all changes in the capital programme by directorate from approval back on the 6th of March last year to the 31st of March 2024 is actually set out in Appendix 2 if anyone wants it. A breakdown of the funding is provided within the body of the report, and the capital expenditure in the year was sufficient to cover the full allocation of the supported borrowing allocation from Welsh Government, and 327 of the General Capital Scheme grant has been spent during 2023-24. In some instances where schemes were originally planned to be financed from the general capital funding, the schemes have underspent at outturn, and other schemes planned to be funded from capital receipts, revenue contributions, etc., have been substituted in their place. Further funding streams were used, including a total of 43 or just over 43 million in the form of Welsh Government grant, other grant income, and Section 106. And additionally, 29.399 million has been drawn down from reserves or funded through revenue contribution to capital. Just over £1 million in capital receipts were received in 23-24, and there's a breakdown of receipts as of 31st of March, which was just over 7.7 million, is included in the report. I think it's important to recognise the work undertaken to deliver the capital programme, and the schemes that have been successfully delivered over the last year include 11 schemes through Learning and Skills, and that could be as much as, building a whole school or doing work on an individual school, such as the sports barn in Romiley Primary, or updated kitchens or things like that. So a wide range of activities and schemes there. And under social services, there's a really interesting scheme which I'm hoping we can get an update on at some point, where e-bikes are being provided for carers. So if they're working in a local area, and particularly if they're not drivers, they can get between calls inexpensively on e-bikes. So, as I said, a comprehensive report that lays out where we are going forward, and we've got 5 recommendations here. And the first one is that Cabinet is recommended to note the year-end capital position for financial year 2023-24. Cabinet's recommended to approve the additional scheme budgets as set out in Appendix 1. Cabinet notes the summary position of the changes in the capital programme by directorate from approval at Council on the 6th of March 2023 to 31st of March 2024 as set out in Appendix 2, I nearly got that wrong. Cabinet note the emergency power approved in respect of the slippage is set out in Appendix 3, and that this report is referred to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee for consideration. And I look forward to the discussions there. I'd move.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Super. No dissent there. Agenda item 7 is the Annual Treasury Management Report 2023-24. This is something that, comes before us this time every year, and because the Council is required by regulations issued under the Local Government Act 2003 to produce an annual Treasury Management Review of activities and the actual prudential and Treasury indicators for 2023-24. The report meets the requirements of both the CIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management and the CIPFA Prudential Code for Capital Finance Local Authorities. During 2023-24, the Council complied with its legislative and regulatory requirements, and the full details of that are laid out and detailed in the report. The Council's borrowing requirement increased 3.17 million 23-24, giving a total capital financing requirement of 198.792 million on the 31st of March this year. And the Council held 143.312 million of gross external borrowing. So the Council was therefore under-borrowed by 55.48 million as of March this year. Borrowing was only undertaken for capital purposes, and the statutory borrowing limits were not breached. The council's financed new capital expenditure of 3.937 million the council financed new capital expenditure of 3.937 million from internal borrowing. And if you look at the top of page 2, that outlines the council's debt portfolio as of March this year. The council spent 86 or just over 86 million during 23-24. And most of that was financed by capital grants, section 106, and reserves. The council's held investments of 34.195 million at the 31st of March this year, and again they are outlined further down page 2. At the bottom of page 2, it talks about the Bank of England interest rate and the implications of that on us. As a result of higher investment rates, our investment returns increased significantly, whereas the total debt interest charge increased, but by a smaller amount. So consequently, the financing costs as a proportion of net stream for both council tax and housing rents are below the 2023-24 originally budgeted amounts. So yet again this year, I understand that Treasury training will be offered to all members. I know last year's actually was particularly good, so I'm hoping that it will be this year. And as it's such an important area of our work, we've always been a very prudent council. I would strongly recommend that as many as possible are able to attend that. So we just have one recommendation before us here, and that's that Cabinet endorses the annual report on Treasury Management 2023-24, and that the report be referred to the Corporate Performance Resources Scrutiny Committee. Now, that should be Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny. We'll change that typo. Scrutiny Committee for consideration prior to referral to full council for approval. So I'm sure again we will have a full discussion there, and I'd move.
And I'll second that recommendation.
Thank you. Everyone's okay? Just losing my voice. Agenda item. So I'm looking to see who's going to take over when I do. So agenda item 8 is the financial strategy, and this report sets out the council's approach to setting the 2025-26 budget. So as I said, we've looked at what happened last year, and now we're starting to look forward into next year. This is why a lot of us won't have summer holidays. This report sets out the council's approach to setting the budget and planning our finances across the medium and longer term. I think it's fair to say that the Vale of Glamorgan has the third lowest spend per head across Wales, and that's a mixture of us being one of the lowest in terms of government funding, but also that our council tax is below average in Wales, and Wales is below average in the UK, so we are a low charging council. There is little flexibility in our spending, with 81% actually of the budget committed to education, housing, social care and council tax support, with an increasing proportion of the budget directed to these services year on year. We've held firm with overall financial strategy, and that's set out in paragraph 2.8 onwards, and the focus being delivery of the corporate plan, which is also being refreshed along a similar timeline to the budget setting, so that as a council we set out what we want to achieve in the corporate plan, and then our budget should tally with that. It is a challenging time for local government, and this was always the case whatever the outcome of the general election, and there's been a prolonged period of high inflation contributing to higher interest rates and lower growth. July's inflation figures were released yesterday and were higher than hoped, and that may have sort of future impacts. Locally, we've seen unemployment picking up, albeit claimant counts are relatively static. But of real note is the increase in private sector rents, which are up 18% over the last 2 years. We've rolled forward the medium-term financial plan from March's council meeting when the 2024-25 budget was set. The current gap, as we're looking at it, for 2025-26 is 9.4 million. And if we look at that over the 5-year period, that would be 34.5 million. There are emerging pressures, and it's likely that these figures will grow following the detailed review planned for the summer and early autumn. So we will be coming back in the autumn with a more updated figure. There is at the moment a change of focus. Previously, one of our sort of first ports of call has been savings. But there are only so many savings that you can make, particularly when there are such levels of need. So we are actually identifying measures to address the gap with transformation and reshaping of services planned to come to the fore ahead of tactical savings, or as we see quite often called the sort of service level savings. There was a detailed report in the programme to Cabinet in January, and officers are now working through a number of initiatives to be brought forward later in the year. The Council will also continue to review its reserves as our risks change, and also due to the pressures that were faced in 23-24. There'll be further reports on the finances throughout the year, including a budget for consultation in January, and there'll be continuous engagement on our work with our schools, with our residents, and with other interest groups, and scrutiny. So yet again, I would hope that we will have in-depth discussions in scrutiny committees. So what we normally find is a UK level and a Welsh level, both governments come up with their spending plans, and we then have to work out how that feeds into ours as well. Ultimately, by the time we've gone through this in various iterations, we will be presenting a balanced budget for approval to Council in March, but hopefully a lot of people will have had input into that before that happens. There are 6 recommendations before us, and you'll find those at the top of page 3. I'm going to need to have some more water, but so what I will do is say if I can move those recommendations as tabled.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. Everybody's in agreement. Eddie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, give you a chance to clear your throat. When you look at this sort of report, it's amazing the information that comes in. You know, it talks about inflation and all the factors that affect the council's budgets and stuff like that, and the detail that goes into is really helpful. And it's interesting when it looks back over the past year of the impact of what challenges we've been through and where we are now. So I'm just hoping that members are aware and look into this in detail. Often we get reports, and when you look at the size of some of the reports, they're quite complex, but this one has got a really useful information and justification on the reasons why we've got our strategy the way we have and why we do things. So I'm hoping that that's taken on board when we come to discussion, not at scrutiny, but also at full council.
Thanks, Eddie. it is, it's a city, it's like, oh no, not finance again, but it's so essential. But
It's that
got to do.
cycle, isn't it?
it is, it's
yeah.
just, as soon as we get through one, we start on the next. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 9. This is the corporate asset management plan annual update. And again, this all fits in with the previous reports we've got, because effective management of assets is fundamental to us being not only effective but efficient. The report looks at the progress that's been made against the objectives, and that the progress is specifically detailed at Appendix A, but it also provides an overview of the work that's been undertaken in relation to property assets, key strategic property projects, and office accommodation changes. So the asset management plan that we're working on is actually for 2023 to 28, and there were a whole load of people right across the council that were working on this, because at the end of the day it needs to be a fully coordinated approach from all departments and also people with specific technical knowledge. And the objectives for the asset management plan are set out at paragraph 2.3. And one, that we're looking at today is objective 2 is to opportunities to generate capital receipts. We mentioned that some of our capital programme was funded through capital receipts, and we've got an agenda item later on about releasing some small areas of land. So we are always working towards to that end to make our assets work for us. The council has a strategic insight board, and we have these titled, but actually that is representatives of right across the council who are bringing their collective knowledge in terms of looking at sort of governance, planning practices, the technical know-how, etc. And it builds on the recent cabinet report where we were, I think that was back in January, in terms of reshaping and the future ways that we look at our assets. Paragraph 2.8 actually outlines the fact that we're currently developing the next phase of transformational work, including the way that we use our assets. And we're not only looking at whether or not we have the right buildings in the right places to support people in the way that they now work. So we have people moving from other buildings into the civic, and people actually working in more cost-effective buildings. But we're actually looking at the whole way in which we work in future, and looking at a model called the corporate landlord model, where we have a more effective framework for managing our properties. And there'll be more of that in the future. But if a couple of examples are given for office moves, where our legal services teams, our democratic service teams, property services, human resources, Contact One Vale, they've all moved office recently to be in more suitable accommodation. Further moves are in the process of being planned, so that would see social services teams move to T Jenner, the civic offices and potentially other buildings. Then if you have a look at page 5 onwards, there are other buildings that are currently under consideration. So you've got Hen Goleg Day Service there, and in terms of how we go forward on that. A lot of people talk about the Docks Office, and certainly as we're discussing now the future Levelling Up programme funding, about consideration on the Dock Office. It's what is the best use for that? It is a listed building. It is iconic within the town, and it's finding the right way forward for that. because it is a building that is of the people. You know, it needs to be something that is relevant to them. And I think we actually need to make it very, very clear now that we fully recognise its iconic place in the town, and there is no way that this building would be going out of public ownership. So I think that's got to be said straight off. But we recognise that the building probably has a more productive and beneficial use for the town, and so we'll be looking at. But the thinking around that is actually laid out, as I said, at the bottom of page 5 and onto page 6. We've looked at Contact One Vale and how that works, and you know, a whole range of other things as well. So that's a sort of an update on where we are with the corporate asset management plan. But I think as we move forward with the corporate landlord model, there will be future updates, and I find that quite exciting too. Only 2 recommendations, and that is that Cabinet notes the progress made against the targets set by the 2023-28 Corporate Asset Management Plan as described in this report and Appendix A, and secondly that Cabinet refers this report to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee for their consideration, with any views from the committee referred back to Cabinet for their consideration. And I'd move.
And I'll second those recommendations.
And Eddie, you want to come in?
I don't normally intend to speak so much, but you've identified 2 places which affect the social care. You mentioned the doc's office, and quite rightly so. It is an iconic building, and there's no qualms about what where it's going to fit. But we recognise for the staff, particularly, and for the service users that go in there, it's not the best building for that. So I'm looking forward to that. Recognising the current building, it does cost quite a lot in maintenance and whatever, and we've got opportunities with the other work that's my space or whatever that we can maybe look at that. But I want to mention Golling, because at day service in the report it does talk about a previous transition that we had, and you can see in there that it talks about the Rondell House, whatever, and we amalgamated those buildings, and at the time there was some concern regarding that, but it's been some years now since it's been put in place, and it was really successful. We're in that transition place now with Hengolig, and just so the members are aware and the public are aware, this isn't just been done to the service users. They're actually engaged, and to the point where they're actually looking at other authorities, how they're delivering this service, and the feedback I'm getting is it's quite positive. There's a recognition that what we've got at the moment is probably dated, and we provide these services, and there's opportunities within the Vale for the service users to take up as well. So hopefully that's ongoing, and hopefully a future report will give us more detail on that. So just thought I'd let you know.
Super, thanks, Eddie. Yes, I've been hearing really good things about the engagement that your team have been doing with service users. So one of our highlights, I think. But yeah, so that's all agreed. Everybody seems happy with that. And we can move on to agenda item 10. And this is building on from our inclusion in the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index this week, where we're in the top 100 UK workplaces. This is our application to be recognised as a county of sanctuary. Back in March 2023, there was a motion to council, and where it was resolved that the council become a member of the City of Sanctuary Local Authority network and works towards accreditation as a county council of sanctuary. We said for all, and I'll go through that a little bit more afterwards. and to use its platform to promote welcome and inclusion across the wider community. Appendix A to this report is the draft submission for accreditation and the supporting action plan. I'm not going to go into it in huge detail, but I think when the motion was taken to council, we stated that if you have a look in the background section, paragraph 1.3.1 particularly talks about the major contribution of individuals, families, towns and communities across the Vale of Glamorgan to provide a place of sanctuary for those fleeing oppression, persecution and war in their home country. And it's fair to say that we would not be able to apply for accreditation if it wasn't for the actions of residents of the Vale of Glamorgan over many, many years. We were hearing earlier about people who've welcomed others for over the decades. But I think if we have a look at paragraphs 1.34 and where it also notes that anyone can suffer bullying, harassment and intimidation because of any protected characteristic. And that the underpinning values, aims and objectives of the Declaration are equally pertinent to any individual living within the Vale of Glamorgan. They too should have access to sanctuary or refuge from oppression, persecution or other dangers. So that's why for us, our application is to be a county of sanctuary for all. The actual application, as I said, is included in Appendix A. I won't go into huge details on that. I need to move my papers sideways. But actually, if you have a look, it talks about the way in which the Vale of Glamorgan already supports its residents, and you know, whether that is by being age friendly or looking at sort of a race equality matters county or diversity champion or disability confident employer, actually making sure that we look at stuff. And one of the ways that we do it is actually quite subtle, but people have said very meaningful, that we use our website, we use our social media, we have flags at the front of the building, we have themed lighting in buildings and events that can raise awareness amongst the wider community. And not only amongst the wider community, if you are somebody affected, even by something that only affects a small number of people, that if you go past a lit tunnel in the right colours on the right day, you'd be amazed how many people know that they therefore matter. So if you go on in terms of the appendix, there's a table there which lays out not only the criteria that we have to meet, what we're currently doing, and I think that by undertaking this exercise, we have realised just how much is going on, not only across the council, but across the county. It's a phenomenal amount of work. But then also the third column is in terms of what we will do. So super amount there. I'm not totally sure how long it's going to take for that to be determined, but I hope it won't be too long before we can hopefully have a celebration. So the recommendations today, we've got 5, and that's firstly that Cabinet notes the progress detailed in this report and Appendix A in relation to work to support the Council submission. Secondly, that subject to recommendation 4, Cabinet approves the Vale of Glamorgan County of Sanctuary document attached to Appendix A in order to seek accreditation on behalf of the Vale of Glamorgan Council. 3, that subject to recommendation 4, Cabinet approves the action plan outlined in Appendix A, including the drafting of a sanctuary strategy. 4, that Cabinet refers this report to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee for consideration, with any views of the committee being shared with Cabinet. And 5, that this report is distributed to members of the Public Services Board, the Equalities Consultative Forum, and all town and community councils for their information. And I'd move. Right, I can see Councillor John, you wants to come in.
Yeah, just briefly, Leader. Talking about this regarding the evidence from the Glamorgan archives for refugees going to Boverton in 1914, I found out further that Belgian refugees were cared for in Boverton from 1914 to 1919 during the First World War, and they stayed in the Boverton House area. Those days, of course, the main road in to Lantford Major via Boverton came off the old road, which was through West Camp and RAF St Athan, where the road those days went down through West Orchard, came through West Camp and then into Boverton. And it's the top end of Boverton where many of these refugees lived for 5 years. And a newspaper actually printed at that time by a Belgian journalist. He was so grateful to the people of the area for their care and welcome during that period. I'm sure there are probably many other areas that we can investigate to support our application, because this is just one of many. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwyn. I think that's really interesting, and it is one of those strange things. I mean, we are a coastal community. If you look at Barry's history, where it grew over such a short period of time around the docks, that that growth wouldn't be organic. So there are huge stories there. I mean, there's some really interesting work that's been historically done in terms of Barry, and I think over time, if we get this accreditation, it would be really, really good to pull this together, because, as I said right at the start, if it hadn't been for the actions of our residents, if it hadn't been for the very welcoming nature of the Vale of Glamorgan, we would not have achieved anything like this as a county. So my deep gratitude to everybody that's played their part in that. Actually, should we add an extra recommendation just to thank people that have contributed to this? Because we might be going for accreditation, but actually this is for the county. So could we put a recommendation to that effect?
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm going to have to move that as well. So.
Okay, and I'm absolutely delighted. Michael, so I'd be absolutely delighted to support those recommendations. And I think what this does, it underpins the rich tapestry that we've got as a county for welcoming people over a long period of time. Recently we've had obviously refugees from Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, but we've actually got that. We have a real rich history. Gwyn mentioned about the Belgians, which I actually didn't know about, so that was really interesting to find out. And I think by having this, it endorses who we are as a county, and the welcome that we extend to people, and safety as well. So I thoroughly endorse this and really look forward to this developing and for further discussion at scrutiny as well.
Super. Thank you. No other comments, so that's agreed. Agenda item 11. That's it's reshaping, delivering place-based regeneration, strategic programme and project governance, and the way of working. In essence, there's quite a lot going on. There's quite a lot going on. The Vales had a number of funding streams, plus the fact that the Cabinet agreed a non-Treasury service investment strategy back in 2022 as well, so that we could raise funds to complement other working. We're doing placemaking, which simply put is just about trying to make sure that all developments are in keeping with that local place. Then we've had proposals in terms of the council's reshaping programme and different ways to do that. We know that we want to increase economic resilience within the council, and then we have also got the funding that's been gained from Levelling Up and Transforming Towns funding. So the big question for us is, so okay, how do we manage this? How do we manage it so that the different schemes meet their individual objectives, but at the same time they are cohesive? So it might be that for a particular funding stream, we have to be accountable for that, but we need it to match up with the objectives, etc., for other schemes. So if you have a look, the heading starts at the bottom of page 4, which is key issues for consideration. And so it's looking at the various structures. Paragraph 2.2 proposes governance structures, roles and responsibilities, and also the reporting requirements. And a diagram of that is at Appendix A. So, as you might expect, Cabinet will have single oversight, because at the end of the day, that's where the buck stops, so to speak. And Cabinet will receive reports on a quarterly basis, and those reports will be referred to the relevant scrutiny committees. Similarly, the Council's strategic leadership team, which is made up of the various corporate directors plus a few key individuals with specific expertise, will oversee live projects and the pipeline on a quarterly basis. There's an investment advisory panel that provides an overarching view of it, and that's made up of service leads, and that would be putting in the expertise such as finance, legal input, assessment of corporate performance, risk, procurement, Project Zero, that sort of thing. And that's not a new thing, because, you know, going back to the capital end of year report, that's how we managed to achieve 85% outturn. It's by actually having people with the right levels of expertise overseeing projects. It's anticipated because, as we said, this is going to be, as it's that word again, place. These have to be connected to the towns that they are going to affect. So there will be 4 town level programme boards. And they'll be established by the Strategic Investment and Growth Board. And the role of the town level boards will be to develop concepts and projects at scale and pace within the locality. So that is working with local people to work out what is right for the town so that it can be fed in to the pipeline and then delivered. It might be that other boards will be will be established as well. So some might be to do with the Strategic Enterprise Zone programme. And on that, you might have partners such as the Capital Region, Welsh Government, or Cardiff Airport, or something like that. So it is quite a complex arrangement, or can appear quite a complex arrangement. It's the type of thing that we're currently doing, but I think with the level of regeneration work that we are currently doing, we need to have this laid out so that we know exactly what the reporting mechanisms are, what the decision framework is, who is involved and who is responsible. And by that, we will fully understand, or we will be able to fully monitor the progress and make sure that we achieve the deadlines that govern the programmes. So, as I said, at the back of it, there are the relevant organograms in terms of how it all fits together. So there are 6 recommendations here, and there aren't any changes to them. So I think that we can take those as laid out on page 3, and I'm happy to move those.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. And there are no comments, so those are agreed. Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 12. This is a report for the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Sustainable Places. And this is related or to do with the local area energy plan, the Vale of Glamorgan.
Okay, thank you, Leader. This plan, the local area energy plan, which I'll just, I know we don't like acronyms all the time, but we'll just call it the LAEP. Otherwise, it's going to take me forever, I think, to keep saying the actual plan name. There's a huge amount of work has gone into this plan, and it's taken some time to get to this stage. But I think that reflects actually that the seriousness and the work that we've put into this, and it's actually setting out then our strategic vision for reaching a zero carbon local energy system by 2050. And just setting out that plan, there's a huge body of evidence then that supports that vision. And then this includes what we call a route map, and that sets out a series of actions for the council to support the process, whilst recognising the role of other key stakeholders in its delivery. And then these include national government, Cardiff Capital Region, the energy sector, along with communities and in local industry. So the plan it provides us with an understanding of the energy baseline and context. It sets out what needs to be done and the scale and rate of change required to reach a net zero energy system. It's the process of this has been funded by Welsh Government, and it is administered via the Cardiff Capital Region, which was initiated then in March 2023, with the council acting as a lead stakeholder in the county. There was an initial data collection exercise, followed then by a series of engagement sessions took place, including 8 workshops with stakeholder partners. And then in addition to this, the council has attended regular regional workshops facilitated by the Cardiff Capital Region team. So in shaping our plan, 11 energy objectives were established. And if you look at paragraph 1.3, the 11 are listed there, which I'm not going to read them all out, but it does include things such as community energy projects, improve and increase electrification, I always struggle with that word, of the transport system alongside modal shift as well, and also about supply chains and create the workforce, and obviously then around green hydrogen for transport and industry. So that's all included in there, along with other elements. So when considering the energy use and supply and generation, there are 3 core parts to that. So these are infrastructure, supply and demand. But we don't actually consider aspects of the energy system which are expected to be overseen by central government or non-energy, such as greenhouse gas, which occur then in our governing boundary. For example, that could be agricultural, land and use and livestock, or for shipping and aviation. So those are all excluded from that. So the plan is structured into 4 main topic areas. So we've got the current energy system. So that's about obviously the existing energy system and the relevant policies and objectives around that. We've got the future energy system. So this is around the future scenarios for the net zero local energy system. And and that includes the risks and the low regrets measures as well. Then there's action planning. So this is the route map and an action plan for us to use to drive the transition forward, including what needs to happen and then what we will do to actually achieve that. And then the last main topic then are the next steps, which is that outlines the immediate next steps and then what is needed to create an enabling environment for the delivery of the plan and ultimately a net zero local energy plan. And I think it's really important to stress that to deliver this plan, it is a collective effort, and that process involved a collaborative stakeholder approach. And this really forms the foundation of the plan. And stakeholders have, it's been a really fruitful exercise, and they've engaged in the process. And this included people such as housing developers, transport providers, local business, and larger industrial players, distribution network operators, public service providers, education institutions, as well as national government. So you can see by that there's a lot of people actually involved in delivering this. And I think that's really important to highlight, is about that collaborative approach to delivering this. So obviously, if you look at 2.5, it actually sets out about capturing the vision and those objectives, and about how a future energy system has been modelled around this. And it talks about the transition in our energy system, and obviously the plan is to a net zero by 2050 is a priority. And I think that's really important. However, obviously 2050 is still some time away, and we've also got objectives of 2030. But I think it's really important that it's sort of taken in literally in bite-sized chunks, really. So the action route map takes each energy proposition and outlines critical enabling actions that will be the focus collectively alongside our stakeholders in the coming decade, with a particular priority and what can be achieved in the next 5 to 7 years, so that within that time we will see some tangible moves and benefits as we move towards that target of 2050. So I've got just 2 recommendations, even though this is a very complex report and a lot of details. Sorry, I forgot to add then that Appendix A is the actual layout of the plan, and it is a lot of reading, but there's a lot of interesting reading as well. So I've got 2 recommendations: that Cabinet agrees and approves the local area energy plan for the Vale of Glamorgan, and secondly, that delegated authority be granted to the Director of Place to make typographical or other minor changes as necessary. And I think that's in line with the fact that this will be a live plan, and that there will be reviews and changes as we go along as well. So I'd like to move those recommendations.
Thank you, Bronwyn, and very happy to second. And I can see that Eddie would like to come in.
Thank you, Bronwyn. When I saw this report, I thought, well, acronym city, but you got past that because at the beginning of the document it gave those. But isn't it incredible that what this document does is puts it and quantifies it where we are now, and where, you know, it's given us actual data that we can utilise. And each of those sections for me was, I thought, reasonable, that we could actually take a go at doing some of those. And that's probably for the first time I've seen a document where, okay, 2030, 2050, comparisons between them. And do you know what? At least this puts it in a constructive way. And it's certainly something which I think the public can engage with. So credit to whoever's done that, because it doesn't take much, I know, but I was impressed with it. All right, thanks.
Was that a compliment? I'm just trying to work out.
I think it was. I'll take it as anyway.
Super. Right. Everyone's in agreement, so that's super. And we can move on to agenda item 13, which I will take. This is in relation to the Italian Gardens shelter, and it's relating to the approval to grant a supplemental lease to add the use and management of the Italian Gardens Shelter public conveniences located on Penarth Esplanade to the existing agreement. And I think that's the crux of it, is there is an existing agreement. I mean, again, this is a core building in the Esplanade in Penarth. There is currently a 125-year lease in place that commenced on the 19th of November 2029. And the public toilets were adjacent to the to Coffee Co's premises, and they requested stroke offered actually to take over the management of the toilets, which they would then upgrade, but with the request that they upgrade the disabled facilities, but they stay in exactly the same place. That the male toilets be converted into a new restaurant kitchen, so that the actual space within the premises works more effectively, and that the female toilet, which is actually quite sizable, is changed into a new unisex facility for male and female use. Within that arrangement, the toilets would remain available for public use, that Coffee Co not only would refurbish them at their cost, but also commit to cleaning them a minimum of 3 times daily. And as there are other public conveniences in the area located on the pier, and those will be unaffected and open as normal to coincide with the pier opening times. But I think it's fair to say that Coffee Co do tend to open earlier because of the early morning swimmers on the Esplanade, so it's an extra facility on there. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. It fits in with the existing lease. It makes more effective use of the space. And as I said, and it will be open whenever Coffee Co is open. So just a couple of recommendations on this, and that's that Cabinet approved the proposed supplemental lease to the existing lease with Coffee Co, incorporating the use of the male toilets for kitchen space and retaining the remaining areas as conveniences for customer and public use. Secondly, that Cabinet agrees in principle to disposal of these facilities from council control. I think that needs to be clarified because this is still a lease which is coterminous with the existing one. And thirdly, that delegated authority be granted to Director of Environment and Housing and the Monitoring Officer / Head of Legal and Democratic Services, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood and Building Services, to finalise the remaining details of the terms and arrange for the lease to be executed. I'm happy to move.
And Arlene will second those recommendations.
Super, thank you. And then moving on to agenda item 14. And again, this refers slightly back to the earlier capital report when we were talking about capital receipts. This is related. This is actually a report of the Cabinet Member for Public Sector Housing and Tenant Engagement. So I'll take this report today. And this is disposal of parcels of housing-owned land that have no viable uses for public housing. And sometimes we, as we know, there are pockets of land that actually have a revenue cost in terms of maintaining them or keeping grass cut or whatever, but are never going to be of any use to the council because they're quite often landlocked or insufficient access. Normally they adjoin, properties, etc. So the council can dispose of such land if it's no longer required for its operational purposes and has been declared surplus to council requirements. And there are certain consents that are needed that we will meet on that. So in this case, permission is sought to dispose of the aforementioned non-operational housing-owned pieces of land identified in appendices A, B and C. And the three pieces of land are Marquis Close, Barry, 48 Amherst Crescent, Barry, and Baytree House, Llantwit Major. And so, you know, that's a pretty straightforward, that there were inquiries to see whether or not it was possible to acquire these areas of land. And so for that to be progressed, we have to bring it to council. So it's fairly straightforward, but because there's a lot of sort of contractual stuff, I think it's important that I don't get it wrong. The recommendations are laid out, numbers 1 to 6, at the top of page 2, and I would move those as laid out.
And I'll second those recommendations.
Thank you. We're all happy. Agenda item 15. This is a report by Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health. So it's over to you, Eddie.
Thank you, Leader. Okay, so this report is it's safeguarding. Generally, it's what I need to do is make members aware that it's across the whole of the council. So there is a corporate responsibility to ensure that there are effective arrangements in place for safeguarding children and adults who require specific council services. And this annual report 2023-24 provides an overview of the corporate safeguarding activities taking place across the local authority. And what I'm saying by that is that as a council, we're responsible for all the residents within the Vale of Glamorgan. And during in the report, you can see it refers to certain categories, not least children, whatever. If you look at the background of the report, it says that attached to Appendix 1, it's the annual report itself, brings together safeguarding activity undertaken by social services, learning skills, managing director's office and resources, and the environment and housing, which just indicates it's across, it's not just set for social services, it's across all the directorates within the council. This presents a more holistic representation of safeguarding activity, and the report provides a composite of activity across these directorates. So that's one of the reasons why this report will be going to the scrutinies, for them to consider the elements of the reports in line with their portfolio areas. You'll see in 1.2 that there is a duty to report, and it's interesting that whether you're a member of the public, but more importantly, if you're a member of staff and work within the council, if we see anything, then that needs to be brought to the attention to the service. So it's quite important that we recognise that there is a duty to report, and that was brought in under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act 2014. So it's been in place for some time. The working together to safeguard people guidance under Part 7 of the Act gives guidance on what should be done, and what should happen if an individual has concerns. And it's really useful guidance, and it explains in layman's terms on making sure that we're looking after the well-being or welfare of children or an adult at risk. The safeguarding, there's national safeguarding procedures. They've been in for some time now. The report says it launched in 2019. These procedures were designed to standardise safeguarding practice across all Wales and between agencies, and in doing so, you can see in the report it explains some of that. Those procedures take place. One of the things that is key that we've introduced, you can imagine we've got a lot of people in positions where they come across children and adults at risk. So we've got a DBS check system that's electronic, and that's far quicker to identify the individuals and to ensure that we've got people with proper checks and being approved. And that's being recorded on a regular basis. Interestingly enough, when we have schools every September, we get new teachers coming in. It's always a challenge to get that to 100%. And if you, one of our reports is it's down, it's 80, 98, 99%. And we're just, you know, when you look at the numbers of teachers that covers, then there's only one or two. But even so, that's, you know, I would expect on the first day that any teacher coming into school would have either the DBS check or the risk assessment carried out. And thankfully, the safeguarding team are looking at that. And when we look at the dashboard that's been created to look after safeguarding, that we can see that there's been an improvement over the years, and we're in a good place. You can see from the report also the members who hold specific roles and responsibilities, they complete an enhanced check, and I'm pleased to note that they're all in date. I was concerned last year when there was some taking a bit longer to do, but I'm pleased to say they're all up to date. The Social Service Director has experienced an ongoing and sustained increase within safeguard activity, such as Section 5 allegations, and there are allegations against practitioners. We know that there's an increase in the report. It does talk about a couple of numbers there which are ongoing. There are also child protection reports and registrations. They've increased, and also adult safeguard reports. I was going to go through some numbers, but we've been here some time, and they are in the report, and hopefully scrutiny will look into those in further detail. What I'm pleased to note is that we've got a corporate safeguarding group, and as I mentioned, they've got a dashboard, and when you look at the dashboard, it's in graph form. You click on a particular aspect of it, and it goes down to the detail. It really is a useful piece of information that the safeguarding group can utilise now, and so we're identifying some areas that we can improve on, particularly when you talk about, for example, we get a report about an adult. We've got a 7-day window where it has to be investigated, and we've reduced that now because we were able to deal with that particular reports in a good way. Within the report, it talks about Regional Safeguarding Board. We're in partnership with Cardiff, and and we align much of our policies and procedures, and that is really useful in that respect. And then there's a link to their annual plan, so that needs to put that in case. So with no further ado, I should go to the recommendations, which are Cabinet notes the work that has been undertaken to improve corporate arrangements for safeguarding and protecting children and adults. 2, the Cabinet continues to receive 6 monthly reports on work carried out to improve corporate safeguarding arrangements and the effectiveness of relevant policies. And 3, that the report is referred to healthy living and social care, learning and culture, homes and safe communities, governance audit, and corporate performance and resources scrutiny committees for consideration. I so move. Thank you.
Thanks, Eddie. It's really encouraging to see the work, and particularly when the dashboard is presented to senior leadership team. I think there's a lot of interest, because this is not just in the ownership of the social services team. This actually affects us right across the council, and we all need to be aware. And I've been quite encouraged when people have, just going about their daily life, have actually spotted incidents where safeguarding might be an issue, and actually are now much more aware of it. So I think that's good, and thank you very much for bringing that here today. I'm delighted to second. And we don't have any other hands up, so happy to agree that. We're moving on now to agenda item 16, and that's a review of Let's Talk About Life in the Vale, the public participation strategy. So over to you, Ruba.
Thank you, Liz. So this report concerns a review and update to the Council's public participation strategy in light of the results of the Let's Talk About Life in the Vale exercise, the survey that were published earlier this year. As you'll all be aware, the Council's public participation strategy was agreed by our Cabinet and published in 2022. And the strategy sets out how the council will explain how we will encourage and facilitate public participation in the Vale of Glamorgan. The strategy is supported by an action plan, which the council has been working to deliver since 2022. Now, the results of the Let's Talk About Life in the Vale survey were published in April. The results showed that the council's priorities are broadly in line with those of our residents. However, they also show that there is more work to be done in how we explain our work and give residents what they feel to be a genuine say in the decision-making processes. When those results were reported to Cabinet in April, if you remember, I tabled an additional recommendation that a full update of progress to date in delivering the strategy would be brought to Cabinet, and that the strategy should be reviewed and its action plan reprioritised in order to respond to the most pressing issues highlighted by the survey. Now, since that meeting, the result of the Let's Talk exercise have also been considered by the Corporate Performance and Resources Committee. When the comments of the committee were reported back to Cabinet in June, it was agreed that these would also be addressed in the forthcoming report. Now, Appendix A to this report, we've set out the progress to date towards the delivery of the Public Participation Strategy Action Plan. There are 26 actions which have been agreed with the Public Participation Strategy, and these include really individual pieces of work and more general changes to practice across the council. These actions are aligned with the council's values and split across 3 work streams. So REACH pulls together a programme of work that will enable the council to engage more with people in decision making. Involve, which is the second, is a programme to improve the mechanisms by which people can share their views, and Represent covers those actions through which we will improve how we put residents' views in front of decision makers. So, all of us as a council. The nature of participation work means that many actions are obviously cross-cutting. So while they sit in one work programme, they may contribute towards another. And you'll see in the appendices, which is quite busy, but the orange and grey shading indicates exactly that cross-cutting. And as well as reporting progress to date, Appendix A also shows those actions that are now being prioritised in response to the results of Let's Talk. The yellow you'll see highlight the yellow highlights indicate that in particular. Now, these priority actions were selected in response to the comments raised by Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, as well as the Voluntary Sector Joint Liaison Committee, SLT, and the Council's own Insight Board, and other forums, including our ECF, the Equality Forum. Appendix B sets out the comments that were raised and identifies where these are already being addressed as part of delivering the public participation strategy, and it proposes actions to address them. And through this process, it's being proposed that we prioritise the delivery of 3 actions. I mean, I won't go into detail on those 3 actions, but just to give you the sort of the headline, it's firstly to set up and promote the e-petitions process. Secondly, to deliver a campaign to enhance understanding of what councillors do and how the council functions. And as part of this, we'll update our existing web pages. And thirdly, to develop a series of case studies to showcase where effective public participation has resulted in positive outcomes for stakeholders and the community. And this last area has been selected because there are many examples of the council's work which is being influenced and services being developed in line with the response to public participation. So, we want to highlight that and develop that. And obviously, while these actions are being prioritised, all the other work to deliver the public participation strategy will, of course, be maintained. So you'll be glad to hear I'm moving to the recommendations, and they are, I think there are 4 recommendations. So firstly, that cabinet note the conclusions drawn by various groups following the publication of the results of the Let's Talk about life in the Vale, and suggestions about how the experiences and priorities of the Vale residents can be used to better inform future service delivery. Second, that the cabinet note the review of the public participation strategy. Thirdly, that Cabinet agree to the actions highlighted within the report being prioritised as part of the Council's work to deliver its public participation strategy. And lastly, that Cabinet receive further updates on the progress being made under the public participation strategy as part of the annual self-assessment report and standalone reports in due course. So I would move those recommendations, Liz.
Thank you, Rupert. Yeah, very happy to second those. And I think that, you know, the from a personal perspective, the Participate Vale pages have been very, very helpful in providing a portal for communication with residents of the waterfront. And you know, I was delighted to receive an email this week telling me that they've now re-established the residents group there, and you know, going from absolute strength to strength. But it was a really effective way of us being able to put information online that we were receiving from the consortium in terms of updates of when things were planned to happen and whether or not they were on schedule, and for people to feed into us. So that's been really good, and hopefully as that moves, and I also think the e-petitions process should prove to be very successful, so that we can help people to sort of actually make their voices heard, rather than, you know, just having odd letters come in. It would be really, really good to understand what concerns there are in the community, so that we can consider them fully. So no, I think that's an excellent report, and look forward to that. So as I said, I've seconded and everybody's in agreement. So that's fully agreed. Thank you. And then you may be thinking that we've got to the end of the meeting, but we haven't. I have one urgent item today under agenda item 17.1, and that is actually relates to the appointment of local authority governors advisory panel that was held on the 10th of July. And so I agreed to bring that to this meeting today, simply because it's nice for them to be appointed so that they can be up and running straight away at the start of the new term. This is in relation to Stanwell School, and they had 3 vacancies for governors. There were 3 vacancies. There were 3 applications received, and the information